Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago has returned from the Jackson Hole Economic Symposium, which focused on the 2025 theme Labour Markets in Transition, Demographics, Productivity and Macroeconomic Policy. Now, the conference highlighted concerns over ageing populations and declining birth rates. For more, we're now joined by the Governor himself, Governor Kganyago, to discuss this further. Governor, very good afternoon to you. A pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time. So let's get right into it. Our conversation really centered around the symposium. So this year's symposium, does come amid geopolitical tensions and notwithstanding, of course, the economic concerns globally, a number of growing concern too by especially central bankers at the symposium is that political pressure, especially when you look at economies like the US, is somehow undermining institutional independence. What were some of your key takeaways from the symposium?
Good afternoon. I think that in the discourse, it was important to reflect on the progress that central banks are making in pursuit of their mandates. And we had to take stock of the progress that had been made with dealing with the great inflation. What had been clear across the globe had been that the public had been concerned about the high cost of living. The public had been concerned about the rate at which prices had been rising. And central banks actually have succeeded in bringing down inflation. And the big issue was, could that disinflationary gains be locked in, and whether there are still risks on the horizons. And amongst the risks on the horizons that were highlighted included what you had raised, which has to do with the posture that is actually taking place in the trade area, the tariffs that had been imposed, and whether we know enough about the impact of the tariffs. Whilst initially it looks like they were muted, the point that is coming across from a number of price setters is that a number of suppliers that actually front-loaded their orders, and those inventories are wearing down, and that we could start to see an effect on prices. How that effect comes on prices is a function of three possibilities: whether the impact of tariffs is absorbed by the absorber, by the exporter, or whether they are absorbed by the importer, or whether the importer passes it to the consumer, or a combination of those three.
I want to then look at the theme for this year. I'm going to come back to just some of the points that you've raised, Governor, but I want to just get your insights in terms of some of the proposals that came out of the theme, looking at particularly aging population and low birth rate, and how this topic was discussed. How is it really impacting communities, especially when you consider developing economies like South Africa, where we also have, slightly different challenges, if you look at it that way, in as far as these two problems are concerned?
Correct. We have got different challenges. The African continent does not face a problem of an aging population. Yes, fertility might be declining, but we do not face a challenge of an aging population. If anything, Africa is faced with what is called a demographic dividend, which means that we have got a huge youth population. And the question that always comes in is, how do you take advantage of that? And the narrative that I always have a problem with is a narrative that says we have got this huge population of young people. They are not engaged in economic activity, therefore it is a threat. Once you see young people as a threat, you are starting on a wrong footing. But if as a country or as a continent, we say to ourselves, we have got a youthful population, these young people are a resource for a country, because what drives economic growth is physical stock of capital and the availability of labor. And the continent has got a youthful population, and the big issue for us is how do we leverage that advantage that we have? And that says to us we must put resources in the development of young people on the African continent, because it is that gives the continent an advantage over the rest of the world. Some of the solutions that are coming from the developed world are things that the continent must also view with concern. Whilst there had been the issues of migration and the restriction of immigration in the developed world, some of the proposals that are coming is that they must open up and go and look at countries that have got young people and attract those young people. And if the continent does not position itself to develop its young people so that they could drive economic growth, then we would actually be left behind.
I want to just go back to what you said, Governor, in terms of, how as central bankers, you're really taking stock, especially around inflation and high costs of living, etc., and also reviewing just some of the good work that has been done there. But given the threats that you mentioned also earlier on, is there a position where frameworks are being looked at, policy is being looked at, particularly as it speaks to inflation?
Well, the thing about central banking is that conversations continue, and they continue all the time. And if you look at the statement of the ministers of finance and central bank governors that came out of Zimbabwe, you will find that there is a reference on at least two occasions about the importance of central bank independence. You still sort of had the same thing coming through that says that it is thanks to this independent central banks that we were able to conquer the rise in inflation. What has also been clear, even as people might be looking at these policy frameworks, is that the public actually hates inflation. There was a global study that was made, and it was found that across a range of countries, the public is unhappy about rising prices. But the public is not just unhappy about rising prices. The public actually want last year's low prices, for example. And so, and therein lies the tension, because the cost of living is a level. That is where we are. What we are currently consuming, what we are currently utilizing in services costs so much. And that is the level. And where central banks come in is that we must reduce the rate at which the cost of living rises. That means that we must rein in inflation. And so that is the challenge that many central banks are facing, is trying to communicate to the public to say, whilst we have brought down inflation, we will not be able to get last year's prices. The only way you could get last year's prices is to have negative inflation. And we know the consequences of negative inflation as it had been experienced elsewhere.
I want to revisit again, youth unemployment, because we know it as a crisis here in this country. So just looking at the symposium's theme around labor markets in transition, demographics, productivity, and macroeconomic policy, this also directly speaks to the youth, particularly when you look at our crisis in terms of youth unemployment. What are some of the solutions here, do you think, as the South African Reserve Bank, you could provide in tackling particularly these, domestic structural issues like youth unemployment?
Well, structural issues are in the realm of big policy. It lies with governments, not with the central banks. The central banks deal with cyclical issues. So we deal with the deviation of employment from its natural rate. We deal with the deviation of output from its potential, and importantly, we make sure that prices are rise at a rate that is consistent with our price stability mandate. But once again, you kept on talking about the problem of youth unemployment, and I underscore this.
Yeah.
The fact that we have got young people who are currently not engaged in economic activity is actually an opportunity for South Africa. And the opportunity says to us, we have got to invest in the development of young people so that they could engage in meaningful economic activity for their own well-being.
Absolutely. Governor, thank you so much for your time. That's where we have to leave it for this afternoon. Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago.